the sense of evasion. What is it? It was not just a simple evasion technique. Upon reflection, there were many strange aspects. Enkrid had left a scratch on Rem's cheek, but had he ever seen his platoon members get hurt like that before? Even when facing opponents or on the battlefield, they rarely got injured. They remained unscathed. Unless it was intentional, they generally fought without knowing injury. How was this possible?
The sense of evasion.
It wasn't simply a technique for avoiding attacks. There was something vague that had been grasped, and now he intended to unravel it piece by piece. Facing the charging gnolls, Enkrid scattered his hands in the air. To an unfamiliar observer, especially to Kreis, it might have seemed like he was just waving his hands in the air, but that wasn't the case. Using his hands as strings, his chest as a launching pad, and utilizing the elasticity of his whole body, he threw daggers. The daggers, now beams of light, embedded themselves into the heads and necks of the gnolls and hyena beasts. The action of drawing and throwing the daggers was so fast that it was barely visible. Had his throwing skills not improved over time? Indeed, they had. Thanks to the development of his isolation technique, strength training, and the balanced improvement of his bodily control. 3 beasts died instantly. Their charging bodies turned into corpses that rolled on the ground. Other gnolls and hyenas stumbled over them. The ones that tripped became a tangled mess, over which more gnolls and hyena beasts trampled. The sound of their footsteps, thud, thud, was grating on the ears.
A cult.
Next to him, Luagern pulled out a whip, shouted the same word, and dashed forward.
Damn it! What the hell is this?
Kreis's voice, filled with alarm, was also heard. Esther likewise stood guard beside him. Even the shouts of the worker who had come out to urinate. It was the same day, but it was met differently. Enkrid's hands moved ceaselessly. It was the second day. This time it was a little different, more leisurely than before. They already knew a wave of indiscriminate monsters was coming. He threw all the daggers he had without hesitation, a sharp whistling sound. He killed the charging monsters and beasts by the dozens, yet the fact remained unchanged. There were many. The swarm of monsters and beasts became a wave again. Those who leaped over the corpses charged at Enkrid.
Front of the leader!
Kreis shouted as he drew his short sword with a metallic clang. Enkrid controlled his breathing. He had learned something from the previous day, something that could only be felt when fighting for one's life. He honed his senses, sharpening his perception. Within the realms of intuition and instinct, he received and parried the gnolls' attacks in succession, thrusting his sword into openings, more vigorously than ever. If nothing else, Enkrid was confident in his stamina. Coupled with his accumulated experience, he was like a compactor, grinding down the monsters and beasts. Some died with their heads severed. Others died from being stabbed. Amidst the chaos, the sounds of metal clashing and flesh tearing mingled. Kreis, watching this, couldn't help but widen his eyes in amazement.
A monster.
The impression he had felt when watching Rem or the other platoon members resurfaced. Such was the level of Enkrid's movements. He blocked everything, countered everything. His sword sliced through gnolls and hyenas effortlessly. Whether Kreis was moved, amazed, or spouted nonsense, Enkrid heightened his focus. No, he had entered a naturally heightened state. He shut out everything around him. Only the sword remained in this world. As time seemed to slow, only the enemy, himself, the sword, the world, and his sharpened intuition remained. Before the relentless wave of monsters, the best a lone human could do. Enkrid swung his sword, but the outcome did not change. By midday, the sunlight was brighter, and while he was less injured than before, this time both of his thighs were severely slashed. He couldn't avoid the 2 cursed gladius swords. Kreis's body was not found this time. Enkrid endured another repeated day, lasting just as long.
Perhaps that's a relief.
He noticed Esther had somehow climbed onto the roof of a hut. Her large blue eyes seemed to hold some emotion, but he had neither the time nor the leisure to discern what it was. The hyena's characteristic growl echoed as the colony leader emerged. It was the leader of the monsters. It was the same as before. With his thighs injured and unable to move, evasion was more difficult, making the situation even worse than before. However, Enkrid was certain that his skills were improving, even in just one day. Harsh and brutal as it was, his senses were becoming sharper.
See you again.
Enkrid muttered incomprehensible words to the knoll, then died flailing in poisoned darkness. The ferryman did not appear, and a new day began. This time he didn't bother to ask Luagern unnecessary questions. She was leaving regardless. There was no need to ask out of curiosity. Asking why she wasn't staying to protect the place would be a futile question. Telling her to come back would be meaningless. If she were going to return, she wouldn't have left in the first place. Leaving meant that whatever she was going after was more important to her. Instead,
It seems your way of waking people up is rather unique.
he decided to wake himself up while gathering his gear.
The weather is good. I thought it would be nice to wake up early. Oof, it's dawn. The moon hasn't even set yet.
Crace grumbled beside him, but Enkrid ignored it. He began sweating again. This day was short. Or more accurately, there was little time to devote to training. So what to do? Use battle as a field for training and practice. That's what Enkrid did. The pain of addiction, the terrible agony and torment. It's something that can be endured. What is it that helps forget the pain? The joy of progress, even if it's just crawling forward. Above all, now it felt like walking rather than crawling. A slightly brisk walk, a sense of progress. How could that not be joyful?
This time, a little more.
It was a continuous challenge. Enkrid set his own goals. Simple but clear goals. To delay the moment of injury as much as possible in the repeating days. At first, he was struck on the shoulder after just a few battles. The next day, he got slashed in both thighs, and then he was hit in the abdomen by a spear. Thanks to his sturdy armor, it wasn't fatal, but if his reactions had been just a bit slower, it could have been.
Still lacking, always lacking.
It was self-reflection. Enkrid recognized his shortcomings through his experiences so far.
Platoon leader brother, martial arts are best learned through repetition until your body remembers, not just your mind. So, get rolling.
He recalled Odin's words.
As soon as you see it, your body should react. Then you can dodge it. There's no need for some weird concentration technique of a lazy person.
He also remembered Jackson's words. Enkrid adapted the training to enhance his coordination and reflexes through body perception and senses in his own way.
What if I could make my muscles remember in every situation?
That's what he did. In the repeating days amidst the waves of monsters, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, he struggled and fought in every single one of those days. Thus, more than 20 days passed. Training was a given, but if the wave of monsters the ferryman spoke of was a wall, it seemed insurmountable, unless he became a knight or had comparable strength. Yet Enkrid didn't let this concern him. He only built up today for the sake of tomorrow. There were no distractions. In the repeating toe days, he simply did what needed to be done. At first, he could handle fewer than 10 monsters. After 20 days, he could block and dodge all attacks in the midst of the knolls, taking dozens of breaths while doing so.
Wow.
It was a feat impressive enough to leave the workers, who should have been fleeing, standing agape. However, he couldn't yet move through the monsters without getting a scratch. So, what did he do? He kept repeating the process. 30-some days passed, then another 40-some days passed. Being poisoned every time, the pain became unbearable. But he learned how to cope. He endured the poison and kept swinging his sword. What happens if you rush into the knoll's ranks right after being poisoned? Blades, hammers, axes, and spears would fly at you from all directions. Slashing was far better than dying from the poison. So he rolled among the knolls and hyenas. Risking his life, he rolled and rolled again. In the midst of these days, he had opportunities to ask about the cult.
Have you heard of the sacred cult of the demon realm?
It was a half-intentional question. With the days repeating and time short, he had no choice but to ask something new every day, making that his standard. He decided to ask about the cult once every 10 days. He counted the days that way. If he was going to ask anyway, he posed meaningful questions.
A rotten group of fanatics.
Luagern, being a frog, did not hold back her hatred. It was hate, a hatred so intense it seemed to make the center of her white, puffy cheeks appear red.
I'll kill them all, every last one I see.
It made sense why she had run off.
I swore on my heart.
When she uttered the word heart, Luagern's demeanor showed her to be a seasoned frog. She hesitated a bit, but eventually spoke. This alone showed how remarkable a frog she was, the sacred cult of the demon realm. Whether that was the official name or not, it referred to the group of madmen who believed their god was imprisoned in a source of monsters that humans couldn't replicate. a cult among cults. The most notorious heresy on the continent. It was said that they even used strange summoning rituals with humans as sacrifices. And what came from those summons? Monsters, sometimes even evil spirits. Not all monsters were the same. There were famous monsters across the continent, and rumors abounded that they were the result of these summoning rituals. What might have been dismissed as mercenary gossip was confirmed by Luagern to be true.
You know salamanders, right?
It was a well-known monster. It wasn't enough that it scattered flames from its skin, it also spewed fire, earning it its nickname.
That's one of those bastards' creations.
The rumor was true.
I was there.
Luagarne was a witness, so does this matter? Not really. It was just a marker he remembered while repeating these days. The training and practice began anew. There was also a process of reflecting on the mistakes made in previous days. It was around the 50th day.
I pushed too hard.
Confident in his stamina, he expended everything from the start.
I'll need to manage my stamina better.
Learning how to fight in a multi-enemy situation, such things naturally became ingrained in him. Days passed, marked by the Knoll's stench that made him shudder. Enkrid had repeated these days 89 times. Still, he could not stand before the leader without any injuries. No, it was more accurate to say that unless he was injured, the leader wouldn't appear. He had extended his endurance from noon to evening, yet nothing changed. The fact that he died remained the same, aside from being able to watch the sunset.
You're sly.
He had to be injured, sustaining a critical wound for the leader to appear. For instance, a hole in his abdomen or a nearly severed ankle. The leader, of course, couldn't be reasoned with. In 96 repetitions, he was killed by the leader's dagger. The end of each struggle was death, a seemingly predetermined fate. Through these repeated days, he naturally began to learn the Knoll's habits.
Gnolls have long upper bodies and short legs.
Learning through the monster's physique, they were slow on their feet but quick with their hands. They wielded human weapons, albeit without formal techniques, often swinging wildly. Their strength was akin to that of an average adult male, but their short legs made their charge slower than expected. They enjoyed attacking from blind spots, and once in close combat, they would bite without hesitation. Avoiding being bitten was crucial. Their bite force was exceptional. Both hyenas and gnolls, if bitten without activating the power of the heart of the beast, it was nearly impossible to break free. He also learned something else.
2 swords.
When using 2 swords combined with the heart of the beast, he could accomplish incredible feats in a single moment.
I could cut through everything.
Even Kreis felt relaxed enough to joke. The problem was sustainability. No matter how well he managed his stamina, he couldn't maintain it indefinitely. So he repeated the process, dodge and dodge again. The sense of evasion was somewhat a matter of innate talent. While Jackson claimed it could be developed through training, it only worked for those naturally predisposed to it. Enkrid addressed this by engraving each movement into his body. Thus,
The muscles remember.
he ingrained the act of seeing and reacting into his muscles through countless repetitions. It became a reflex not stored in the mind but in the body. Through repetition, he reached a point where he could react instantly upon seeing something. His body coordination had finally settled in, seeing, evading, and reacting in an instant. It became possible. For 186 days, Enkrid became aware of the concept of coordination and felt the change in his body's responses. At the moment he sensed the spearhead flying from behind, he turned and grabbed the spear shaft. It was like a stunt. A spearhead aimed at his back. Enkrid twisted his body to evade it, and in the same motion reached out and grabbed the shaft. It was like a scene from a choreographed play. Then came a dull thud, the sound of a blade striking a head. As soon as he perceived and visualized the movement, his body responded instinctively.
The isolation technique forms the basis that allows you, brother, to easily control your body.
Auden's words resonated with him. Had he not trained his body rigorously using the isolation technique, he wouldn't have been able to perform these actions. The movements he envisioned were executed precisely. Naturally, he also became aware of the flaws in his movements.
With minimal motion.
It was a realization tied to conserving energy. If the movements were too large, unnecessary energy would be lost. Such waste would prevent endurance. Movements had to be efficient. Now that he understood this, he could work to minimize waste. Training in the correct sword technique also helped.
By predicting movements.
He could reduce the waste in his actions. Unbeknownst to him, Enkrid's swordsmanship was also progressing to the next level. It wasn't his intention, merely a byproduct of his desperate struggle to do his best, even as he repeated these nearly 200 days, to the point of being sickened by the stench of monsters and beasts. Enkrid smiled. The joy of growth filled him. Even amidst repeated failures, he felt this way. He did not stop his desperate efforts. Enkrid never ceased thinking about how to move toward tomorrow. It was the result of this contemplation. In an instant, Enkrid felt his entire nervous system become alert. It was on the 200th day. He saw a blade flying towards him. It was just past noon. As he sidestepped with his left foot, the blade sliced through the air. A spearhead thrust from the side, and an axe came from behind. Enkrid ducked while pushing the spear shaft with his palm. The axe struck his shoulder but was deflected. A scraping sound as it scratched the leather armor, but he wasn't injured. Then again spears, a sword called a gladius, axes, and clubs came flying. One mutant swung a club the size of an adult man's thigh vertically. He felt the sword was getting in the way. It hindered his movements. It was harmful, uncomfortable. Enkrid sheathed his sword. No, he even unbuckled his belt while moving. His body felt lighter. Swish, whoosh, zing, slice. Not all the movements of the weapons were visible to him. He decided to observe and react to each one individually. He focused entirely on seeing and responding, forgetting himself in the process. Before long, the midday sun had passed its zenith and was sinking westward. A sneaky hyena repeatedly tried to bite his ankle. Enkrid avoided that too, sometimes retreating, sometimes advancing. He spun sideways and kneed the stomach of a hyena beast that had come too close. Immediately, he threw himself into the arms of a gnoll approaching from behind, using his shoulder to push it away. Using the rebound force, he stood upright. Then, seeing a blade flying towards him, he reached out and struck the gnoll's wrist. Gruk! The gnoll's blade veered off course, slicing the head of a nearby comrade.
Grah!
Another gnoll, enraged, swung a hammer. The movement was large, as was the trajectory. It wasn't hard to dodge. The problem was that such attacks came in groups of 5 or 6 at a time. So what could he do? He observed and reacted to each one. That's what Enkrid did. He pushed away and dodged the spear shafts, evading repeatedly. He focused solely on evasion, excluding any thought of killing the enemy. It was an evasion technique that combined instinct, intuition, and enhanced senses. By then, the sun had set and the moon was quietly rising. Enkrid was unaware of day or night. He was too busy dealing with everything targeting him, ducking, deflecting, dodging, moving. It wasn't a fight to the death, but rather a game of tag. Repeating today's events, Esther had silently settled on a roof several times, watching him. Even in her eyes, it was clear.
What is that?
To explain it would be to describe a scene that made little sense. Enkrid was alone, dodging amidst a wave of gnolls. Just enduring, it was a certain death, unavoidable. But why? Why?
Why are you smiling?
A question arose in Esther's mind. It was a question that would fade after today. The way Enkrid acted was something she couldn't simply describe as stunt. He seemed to be playing among the wave of monsters, the gnolls. He seemed on the verge of death at any moment but never died. He dodged axes, avoided clubs, deflected and blocked. Sometimes he even hugged the gnolls. How could he not? In a desperate situation where standing still meant death, Enkrid grabbed at and shook the arms of the gnolls he hugged from behind, as if they were his own. He used them to block other gnolls' attacks, even deflecting an incoming axe blade with a club. It was madness. He abandoned attacking and focused solely on evasion. As the sunset ended and the moon rose, the carriage of the day reached its destination. Finally, the day came to an end. The moonlight softly illuminated the surroundings, lighting up the summer night. The place was filled with the stench of decay, the smell of corpses, the heat of metal, and the scent of monsters. Enkrid stayed awake all night. More precisely, he ended the day. It meant the day ended without seeing the leader.
Ah.
Only then did his immersion break. Only then did Enkrid realize what he had done.
Ah.
He let out a second exclamation inwardly. It was understandable. He discarded his weapon and focused solely on evasion. Why? Why did he do this? It was a movement driven by instinct, and thus he learned. He learned how to evade entirely. how to observe and react. This was a talent Enkrid hadn't originally possessed. It was a change in his reflex speed and physical ability. The isolation technique built the foundation, and the sense of evasion filled it. It was a tower built from repeatedly surviving amidst poison and blades. He had faced hundreds of attackers. He withstood it. Killing them all wasn't an option. That was something only a knight could do. But enduring it, purely enduring it.
It's possible.
A thrilling exhilaration surged through his body. Even the gnolls, who had attacked all day, would have been speechless with awe, though in reality, there were none left. Enkrid's body was covered in cuts. Blood trickled down his cheek. It was impossible not to get hurt at all. That was out of the question, however. He had no fatal injuries. At the end of that day, as he watched the sunset and the moon rise, he realized the day had ended.
We'll see each other again, but not here.
After those words, Enkrid closed his eyes. Would this be the end of today? Just by enduring? Not a chance. It couldn't be. He had expected this. Then, when he opened his eyes again, the surroundings had changed as expected. A black river, a ferryman.
That won't be enough, will it?
The ferryman passed by. When he closed and opened his eyes again, he saw the ceiling of a cabin. It was another today. This repetition was a testament that merely enduring wasn't the solution. Of course, that wasn't the problem. Though exhilaration surged through him, now was not the time to revel in it. In this endlessly repeating today, with all the accumulated information and thoughts, as soon as Enkrid stood up, he kicked Kreis.
Wake up.
Ugh, what is it so early in the morning?
What's the matter? It's a day where we'll have to run like crazy to avoid dying. It was around the 120th repetition of today when he came up with a slightly unconventional method. He intended to give it a try. The original goal of surviving today had been achieved. It meant he had met the minimum condition he set for himself to pass today.
The sense of evasion.
Along with the heart of the beast, it had now become ingrained in him. He got the hang of it. The results of his rigorous training were evident in his body. So, should he keep repeating this? This cursed today, there was no need. Despite his reputation for being singularly focused on sword training, Enkrid was quite articulate and cunning, especially when it came to using unconventional methods. Enkrid set a goal and achieved it.
I survived.
Spending an entire day and seeing it to the end. Instinctively, he knew that the conclusion would lead back to the original today. No, it was a gut feeling.
Breaking through the wall won't be done this way.
Enduring was never the answer. If endurance was the solution, he would have simply run away from the wizard Resha and the lycanthrope. The traps set by the mad wizard who created his lair in the city's underground passages could have been avoided as well. This was a curse, so a method to break it was needed. Enkrid didn't know the exact solution, but he had some ideas. He had spent time thinking about how to escape today, and this was the method he came up with. If the repetition of today was due to the cycle of killing and being killed, what would happen if he didn't even start that process?
It's worth a try.
The outcome follows the process.
Did I mention that I've worked as a mercenary for quite some time?
He said this after gearing up. Sweat trickled down his forehead and brushed past his chin. It was hot, as expected. Even just gearing up early in the morning raised his body temperature significantly. It was perfect since it awakened his muscles and joints without the need for a separate warm-up. Today there was no time for the isolation technique or training. So this was just right. Luagar tilted his head in confusion at Enkrid's words. He wondered what Enkrid was talking about all of a sudden.
Is he having a headache this early in the morning?
That seemed to be the gist of Luagarna's gaze, but Enkrid continued speaking.
I've fought with cultists before, the savage cult of the demon realm.
When he mentioned it nonchalantly, Luagarn reacted.
You mean cultists?
His reaction was still distinct. A chilling air passed between them. It was a menacing atmosphere. Ignoring the tension, Enkrid spoke.
Do you know anything about it?
This felt a bit awkward. Enkrid wondered if he needed to practice his acting skills, but Luagarn didn't seem to notice. She was more distracted by something else than by his awkward speech and behavior. The mention of cultists came up. To her, they were people who should be exterminated on sight. They were also a target of her vows.
There was one guy we missed back then. I can't believe I just remembered it now.
Enkrid tapped his forehead as he spoke. This also seemed a bit awkward. He definitely needed to practice his acting. There hadn't been enough rehearsal. Of course, Luagarn still didn't seem to care.
Do you remember the guy who used to follow behind Deutsche Pullman? The ugly guy with thick lips.
Frog had a sharp eye for detail. Yes, he had a face resembling a fish. Enkrid knew a few more of them. After all, he had repeated this day over 200 times. Was that the only thing he had learned, however? That cultist disguised as a fish was definitely the most troublesome. In the repeated days, Luagarn always chased after him and never returned.
That's right. Are you sure that he's a cultist?
Yes, I swear on my sword and everything I have.
Luagarn knew how much Enkrid valued his sword. It sounded similar to her own oath made from the heart. It carried a weight unusual for a human's words. It meant she believed him.
If you don't believe me, we can go and ask him ourselves.
Let's go.
That was it. She was more decisive than expected. Luagarna pulled out her whip, wrapped it around her hand, and walked briskly. She seemed determined to find Deutsche Pullman. If he wasn't there, she would likely search for him wherever he might be.
What's with that awkward speech?
Kreis, who had been watching silently, asked, "Was it really that awkward? Probably. But that wasn't the important part."
You should get moving too.
Enkrid said, stepping forward. He had measured the time countless times as he repeated today. He tried to find out what was causing the monsters to gather so persistently. Even if he couldn't find the problem, at least knowing it made things easier.
Blocking it is not hard.
At least for Enkrid. He had done it multiple times before, so there was no hesitation.
Esther, let's go together. Kreis, go find the village chief immediately.
What?
Kreis questioned, looking bewildered. The awkward act was over. There was no need or meaning in it.
Tell him that from now on, I will command all the city's forces.
Suddenly?
Yes, suddenly. If they don't comply, show them this. Tell them disobeying orders will result in immediate execution.
Enkrid handed over a written order and then turned around.
Where is the leader going?
Kreis was perceptive. He sensed something in Enkrid's demeanor.
To the gate. If the village chief resists, take him hostage or something.
The last comment was half-joking. Enkrid ran on. The clinking sound of the armor he wore echoed with each step. Running in this armor is quite uncomfortable, but it's not like he could take it off. Esther, running beside him with much lighter steps, glanced at Enkrid.
Just follow me without asking questions. We don't have time.
He said to Esther, who nodded in response. She looked almost like a real person. They arrived at the main gate. The dawn hadn't broken yet, so they weren't late.
We're not late.
They made it in time. Usually, 5 members of the vigilante squad guarded the gate. 2 in the watchtower, 2 below, and 1 squad leader. The squad leader was likely in the outpost beside the gate. Excluding the squad leader, there were 4 of them, and they tended to hold their position in the tower during fights. They were the kind who would shoot arrows at the faces of allies trying to climb the tower, siding with monsters. Enkrid was all too familiar with their faces.
Huh? What's this?
One of them, a man with a friendly face, asked. Enkrid addressed the 2 blocking the gate.
From now on, command here has been transferred to this platoon leader.
What?
The man looked puzzled, and Enkrid continued.
I'm now responsible for the village's security.
Wasn't Deutsche Pullman wary of something like this? That caution had become a reality. The man, pretending to be one of Deutsche Pullman's subordinates, had a hardened expression.
Did you get our leader's permission?
At that, a mercenary with a spear, one of Deutsche Pullman's men and the squad leader, emerged from the outpost. Of course, that wasn't the important part.
Do you have a problem? Once the order arrives, it's natural for me to take charge.
Since when? And for how long will you be playing the leader?
I'll start now and continue until the colony issue is resolved.
Enkrid's calm answer made the man's expression darken. His face looked quite menacing when frowning.
Damn it, are you messing with me? Hey, do you think I'm a pushover?
Well, it was the reaction Enkrid expected, so he responded with the prepared words.
If you have a problem, you don't have to use your tongue instead of your fists.
Is this guy out of his mind?
The man approached, clearly intending to strike. Though he hadn't drawn his weapon yet, he swung his fist directly at Enkrid. As the punch flew towards him, Enkrid seemed motionless. At the last moment, he tilted his head to dodge, then kicked at the man's ankle with his left foot. It was a fluid movement, seamlessly dodging and striking in one motion. Caught off guard, the man stumbled forward, losing his balance. Enkrid pushed him lightly with his left hand as he stumbled. The man fell to the side as he tried to use his spear to stand, his face flushed with anger. The sound of a sword being drawn. At the same time, a blade pressed against his neck.
Don't get up. Don't resist. Disobedience will result in immediate execution.
With the blade at his throat, especially seeing the blue hue of the sharp edge, speaking out of turn was difficult. The man swallowed hard and finally spoke.
Do you know how many members of the vigilante squad there are? You can't handle it.
It was meant as a threat, but it didn't sound threatening. Anyone could hear the fear in his voice. Enkrid didn't intend to kill him, he just expected this reaction. It was a simple principle.
How did the gnolls and hyenas get inside?
How did a thick log wall become human bars? Why did this place become their feast? Because they got in. Did they climb over the wall? That couldn't be it. Gnolls are creatures with underdeveloped lower bodies. The same goes for hyenas. The wall is something monsters can't climb over. So did they break in? No, that's not possible. There's only one answer. The gate was opened. Then why was there no reaction until such a large number of monsters arrived? At first, Enkrid hypothesized, and today he confirmed it. The one who opened the gate is guilty. The ones in the watchtower who saw but didn't report are guilty. With his sword still drawn, Enkrid looked for the emergency bell. It was next to the gate. Since that bell wasn't rung, only one person here is innocent, and that was the man now on the ground. So what reaction should he expect? It was what he had been waiting for. From the watchtower, a female soldier took aim with her bow. As she silently aimed and fired, Enkrid lightly jumped to the side. At the sound of the bowstring releasing, an arrow thudded into the spot where Enkrid had stood.
Crazy. Don't shoot.
The squad leader, who had been defeated by Enkrid, shouted in shock, but it was futile.
Kill him.
One of the men who had been standing by the gate, smiling warmly, gave the order. Upon hearing it, the two soldiers in the watchtower knocked arrows to their bows again. Of the two, one was a female archer and the other a male. Enkrid knew from experience that the woman was the more skilled archer. There was no time for hesitation or mercy. A sharp whistle split the air. Two throwing knives sliced through the sky. Both soldiers in the watchtower groaned in pain. These were their death throes. A hole in the neck meant certain death. The male archer fell forward with a thud, hitting the ground, while the woman clutched her throat and collapsed. Enkrid saw the male archer's neck bent at an unnatural angle as his body hit the ground. Blood dripped down from the watchtower where the female soldier had been. It all happened in an instant.
You're insane.
The squad leader shouted in shock. Enkrid ignored him, pointed his drawn sword forward and spoke.
Both of you are subject to immediate execution for insubordination and attempted murder of a superior. However, if you drop your weapons and surrender, I will spare your lives.
It was a futile statement.
Damn it.
The two cultists disguised as vigilante members at the gate glared with strange, intense eyes. They were exceptionally skilled. They moved quickly and with great coordination. Both drew short swords, splitting up and charging at Enkrid simultaneously. The two of them cut through the dawn's chilly air as they flew at him. Before standing here, Enkrid had endured countless days, continuous training, repeated honing, the development of evasion sense, coordinated movement, keen reflexes and sharpened senses. It all led to a change in reaction speed. When your reaction speed changes, what do you see? What becomes different? It's like discovering a new world, a feeling of moving faster than others, twice as fast. Rem Ragna, Jackson, Auden, the feats they could perform, Enkrid could now match so. The outcome was not surprising. Deflecting the incoming swords from both sides with a single sweep of his blade was easy. He swung to the right first, then quickly to the left, effortlessly parrying both attacks. To his attackers, it must have been bewildering. The two with the short swords stared in shock. What was that? How did he block that? It seemed as if the blade had vanished. Enkrid didn't stop. As if to celebrate entering a new world, Enkrid swung his sword with all his might. What he had gained from those countless days wasn't just a sense of evasion and coordination. With a single breath, he awakened the heart of great strength, doubling his speed. The moment he saw and felt something, His body moved reflexively. Enkrid swung his sword twice more. To the right, he swung from bottom to top, and to the left, from top to bottom. Both strikes aimed at the wrists, and the result was as expected.
Arg.
Arg.
The hands holding the short swords fell to the ground as the wrists were severed. Standing calmly between the two bleeding men, Enkrid held his sword steady.
What is this? Why are you suddenly slashing like a madman?
The squad leader, who was sitting alone, spoke with utter bewilderment. Enkrid looked at him and spoke.
It seems like there's a stench. Is that gate really closed?
He had seen the gate open with a pulley system when he first arrived. That must be the locking mechanism.
What?
Check it. If you don't get up right now, I'll consider you an accomplice and cut you down.
It was a light threat, but coming from someone with exceptional resolve. The squad leader quickly stood up. At a time like this, collapsing with shaky legs would be problematic. He moved to check the pulley.
Why is this unfastened?
He exclaimed in surprise and quickly secured the pulley. If the locking mechanism was unfastened, the gate wouldn't serve as a barricade. It would just be a gate that could be pushed open. The man strained his arm muscles as he locked the pulley, panting heavily.
Huff, huff, but what stench?
Just as he mentioned the stench he had heard earlier, there was a loud thud. Something hit the wall from outside, making the ground tremble. The stench, now familiar and nauseating to Enkrid, seeped through the thick gate. A roar erupted from outside. It was the cry of a gnoll. The heavy force and the unseen presence were felt through the gate. The squad leader, who had been standing at the gate, stepped back nervously. Was he going to wet himself? Fortunately, the squad leader wasn't that weak-hearted. Enkrid glanced at him, and then turned his attention to the two with severed wrists.
Are you cultists?
The two men's eyes widened. They didn't need to speak, their expressions were answer enough. Should he spare them? No, it wouldn't mean much. True, cultists were said to use strange sorcery, but these didn't seem capable of such things, so they likely weren't important. Leaving them alive would be like leaving a dagger at his back. Thrust, thrust. With 2 quick stabs, Enkrid created 2 more corpses. Enkrid then climbed the watchtower. He needed to assess the numbers and the situation. Being in a higher position is always advantageous. Dawn was breaking, which improved visibility. In the sunlight, he saw hundreds of beasts and monsters. The sheer number was horrifying. Enkrid was struck by the fact that he had survived among them.
Though I barely hung on without dying.
There were so many. From this vantage point, the numbers were overwhelming. The creatures were crashing into the walls and gate. While Enkrid had cleared the watchtower, there were no guards on the wall. Enkrid spotted several vigilante corpses lying where they should have been standing. It must have been the cultists, specifically those he had just killed.
Seriously, what is going on?
A voice called from below the watchtower. It was Kreis. The joke had become reality. Kreis had the village chief at knife point. Behind him were several vigilante members with grim expressions.
Seriously, what's happening?
Kreis looked desperate. Enkrid couldn't help but smile at the sight.
Esther.
Enkrid called Esther to guard the gate. The panther responded as if understanding, seeming almost more human than some people.
When made to a...
Behind the village chief, Deutsche Pullman and his followers gathered. Most of them looked utterly confused. There were monsters outside, a man holding a knife to the village chief's throat inside, and dead comrades around them. Deutsche Pullman, too, appeared shaken. It was understandable, but Enkrid didn't care. Enkrid spoke calmly.
I give the orders and hold the command. No objections will be tolerated. We need to stop the monsters. Get the remaining vigilantes onto the walls. Anyone who can shoot a bow goes up.
No one moved. Deutsche Pullman was a man of strong nerves. Despite the booming noises from outside, he glared fiercely at Enkrid. Enkrid knew what he had to say.
Kreis cut his throat.
With the village chief's life at stake.
But what to keep moving forward. Shoot arrows into the monster dits.
Deutsche shouted. Kreis naturally did not cut the chief. Enkrid shrugged.
You'll have to explain this forward.
Deutsche yelled furiously. Enkrid ignored him. This was a stopgap measure. The goal was to prevent the situation from escalating, to act quickly and stop the Gnoll invasion from happening at all. If they managed to do that, the cycle of today's events might change. Enkrid had thought of a way to get through today, but whether it would work was uncertain. This was uncharted territory. Luagarn was still nowhere to be seen, as were Deutsch's other subordinates.
Damn it, Enki.
As the situation settled and they prepared to defend, Finn emerged, crawling from the side. Finn, who had been out on patrol, returned with a wound in her stomach, so that was it. Finn had fought someone and got injured. It wasn't a light injury. A hole in the stomach is painful, and walking becomes difficult. Because of Finn's injury, they couldn't alert the town about the monster attack. If not for this, Finn would have noticed the colony's movements.
Christ, let the chief go and treat Finn first.
Enkrid ordered. It wasn't a fatal wound, but it needed treatment.
The number of monsters and beasts is close to 1,000.
Despite his injury, Finn managed to relay the information, her face pale with fear. Enkrid just nodded.
Can you explain what's going on?
The village chief, his face also pale, spoke up. Truly the chief of a pioneer village, he still had some courage left, given he was demanding an explanation in such a situation.
Let's deal with the situation first.
Enkrid replied, heading towards the wall. Even a clumsy hand needed to shoot more arrows now. They also needed to reinforce the walls to survive the day. Today was just beginning. The sacred cult of the demon realm aims to transform the continent into a dark realm. Why?
Why is sorcery considered wrong? Why can't we see that within it lies the path we need to develop and evolve? It's natural to fear the unknown, but avoiding it won't solve everything.
It was the sound of ghouls blowing trumpets, so why turn the continent into a demon realm?
Because it's the right thing to do.
Where else would the term fanaticism fit so well? Why? There is none. Justification. There's no such thing. They just believe. They simply say it must be so. Blind faith, pure fanaticism. Thus the cultists were truly insane. That's why the Inquisitors hunted them down with such fervor. The cultists had made several attempts to create a demon realm, and similar incidents had occurred in this land. They gathered 100 freshly caught young goats as a sacrifice, trying to turn this entire area into a land of monsters and beasts. The cultists began gathering monsters even before the pioneer villages were established, so no one saw it coming. At first, they wanted to establish a kingdom of gnolls in this area by gathering monsters. It later turned into raiding the villages. The well-fortified pioneer village, with its walls and watchtowers, could have become a small fortress. Such a fine prey had walked right into their hands.
God has blessed us.
The cultists truly believed this. Wasn't this a sign to further fatten the monsters and enlarge their bodies? Before them, the sacrifice was offering itself, cutting its flesh to feed them. Thus began the event of consuming an entire pioneer village. This was not something to be taken lightly. The cultists poured their hearts into it. They infiltrated mercenary groups while secretly gathering more gnolls. The cult's spells were deeply tied to the monsters. Experts in brainwashing and manipulation intervened. Even low-ranking followers and priests participated. Gnolls, monsters with hyena-like habits, always fought in packs and moved together. They had a tendency to form colonies. All they needed was a leader. Curses and enhancements were bestowed upon a single gnoll. Thus they formed an army of gnolls. Creating such a colony into hundreds didn't happen overnight. The blood, sweat, and tears of the cultists were embedded in this work.
We shall establish a sanctuary.
They shouted their intention in the middle of the wilderness. They poured in krona to arm the gnoll horde. They created leaders and enchanted them with spells. The resources put into this operation were far greater than what it would take to run a pioneer village. It was worth it. Great rewards require great investments. This was just the beginning of what the sacred cult of the demon realm sought to achieve. While the cultists invested time and resources, the pioneers built walls. This was the full story of what had happened. It was something that happened without Enkrid's knowledge. Naturally, it was an unexpected event. So what? It didn't matter. Knowing wouldn't change anything. Enkrid didn't care about the background stories. He didn't ask why. Monsters were approaching, and he only thought of killing them all. They were monsters and beasts. Killing them was enough.
What? A horde of beasts?
Kreis had a vague understanding of the situation. A horde like this suddenly appeared in the wilderness and fields, and they were armed, with spies planted within the village. What kind of nonsense was this? They held a knife to the village chief's throat, heard the cries from beyond the walls. and in the meantime roughly treated Finn. Then, Kreis hurried up to the watchtower to check the size of the monster horde, and his mind was racing.
The cult.
It was the work of cultists. They were the biggest troublemakers across the continent, bound by malice and hostility. Look at that horde of monsters. What else could they call it but malice and hostility? Roughly, Kreis guessed that the horde was a result of the cultists' blood, sweat, and resources. He could only guess because knowing wouldn't change anything, so he left it at that.
What does it matter?
Survival was what mattered, and Kreis' mind raced even faster. He reached a conclusion.
No trebuchets or mangonels.
They didn't have siege engines. Dreaming of large siege weapons was out of the question. Did they have enough troops? They were certainly fewer compared to the number of monsters and beasts. He would be lucky if the wall held for 1,000 years, but the number of gnolls and hyena beasts far exceeded hundreds. Could they hold out? Could they withstand it as it was? A few hyena beasts were clawing at the wall, trying to climb it. If they kept scratching, wouldn't they eventually find a weak spot? A small crack would soon become a hole, and the hole would become a passage and entrance. Many gnolls wielding weapons were pounding on the wall, and there were plenty of them hacking at it with axes. The wall was accumulating countless scratches. Was there a hole somewhere? Could it be blocked if breached?
It doesn't seem possible.
At the very least, this seemed like a fight with a time limit. They couldn't hold out for long. That was the conclusion. So, they needed to wait for reinforcements. They had seen a few birds, typically used for urgent communication, known as blue-feathered pigeons. Even if they sent them out, there was no telling how long it would take for reinforcements to arrive. The conclusion was the same. Could they hold out? Kreis felt a sense of foreboding. When they spoke of the wall's strength, Kreis had envisioned a colony of a typical size. At most, such a group would be around 30 to 50, but this was swollen to about 10 times that number.
This isn't good.
Kreis felt a rising sense of dread. He reflexively sought out his platoon leader. He saw the platoon leader moving, but Enkrid showed no signs of unease. There was an odd air of composure about him. He quietly walked up onto the wall. Kreis knew that his platoon leader, who was obsessed with training, was quite sharp-minded, even if he didn't always pay attention to his surroundings. So, seeing that kind of demeanor made him think that perhaps there was something Enkrid had faith in. In any case, there was nothing Kreis could do right now. He had treated Finn and taken a good look around from the watchtower.
Hey, I'm hurting.
Finn called out from below.
I'm coming down.
Kreis replied. Kreis came back down. He had roughly bandaged the wound, but there was a hole in her stomach. It seemed she had narrowly avoided any damage to her internal organs.
I used the Alcaraz technique to avoid hitting my organs.
Finn said. Is there really such a technique?
I'm joking.
To be making jokes at a time like this, Finn must have been quite sharp-witted.
You sound like Rem's wife.
That's an insult. I challenge you to a duel.
Yes, sure.
Kreis said this casually as he rechecked the wound. It seemed difficult for Finn to move vigorously, but at least it wasn't a fatal wound.
You won't die.
For now, anyway.
Finn had also noticed. It was the anxiety about how long the wall could hold.
Yeah, well.
Kreis brushed it off casually. If things went wrong, he had a way out, though it would be a cruel fate for those left behind. He hadn't walked around the village for nothing. Kreis always prepared for the worst, so he had already scouted an escape route. There was a long shooting platform built on top of the wall. Below it, the gnolls and hyena beasts were swarming and making loud noises. It was practically a field of monsters.
What the hell? What's going on? What's with all the monsters? Why are there so many? No, there are too many. Pam? Pam is dead. No, Ralph too?
The sight of monsters and the still warm bodies of their comrades. When Enkrid went up, the militia was still in shock. Not one of them had drawn their bows. They were in a state of panic. At least no one was screaming or wetting themselves, which was a relief. With a peculiar cry unique to gnolls, they threw themselves against the wall and the gate. The wall shook slightly with the impact, but it wasn't enough to collapse it, at least. That was Enkrid's judgment. The gnolls rammed their shoulders, kicked, and struck the gate and wall with weapons, but for now it was holding. The wall was sturdy. However, the morale of the militia was at naught. They were overwhelmed by the force of the gnoll horde. Everyone was terrified.
What the hell is going on here?
It was one of the militia members. This place was not central even within the kingdom's territory. The border guard was at the northern end, and this was even further out. On the continent of Penhanil, this area was considered the north, a place where monsters and beasts were common. But even so, this number of creatures was not normal. It was an unusual sight. Fear, pressure. It was the effect of the monster's overwhelming presence. A few mutated gnolls picked up stones from the clay-colored ground and threw them. The stones were as big as a person's head, slamming into the wall with a thud. Smaller stones flew towards where people were standing.
Eek.
The militia ducked under the wall as stones whizzed by. The wall was sturdily built, as Kreis had assured them that it wouldn't collapse against an ordinary monster colony. But it could still be breached if left alone. The wall wasn't designed to withstand such large numbers. The creaking gate and the militia struggling to hold it. This wasn't working. If they succumbed to fear, it would be over. Waiting for the wall to be breached would only lead to death, rendering all their efforts from the morning useless.
If you're not going to shoot, hand it over.
In this situation, Enkrid climbed up the steep stairs and extended his hand.
Huh?
I said, if you're just going to watch, give it to me.
He took a bow from a bewildered militia member standing nearby. It was a short bow with short arrows. It wasn't meant for long distances, but with so many monsters around, he just needed to shoot. Accuracy wasn't the main concern.
It's been a while since I've used a bow.
Enkrid had learned to shoot a bow to some extent. After pulling the string a few times to get a feel for it, Enkrid took aim. He gripped the bow with his left hand, stretched out his arm, knocked an arrow, and drew the string. The bow creaked as it bent under the tension. He had enough strength. He aimed at one of the monsters and released the arrow. It happened just as a gnoll was ramming the wall with its shoulder again. The sound of the arrow being released overlapped with the thud. The arrow flew and embedded itself in the ground, missing all the gnolls and hyena beasts. It broke quickly, trampled under the feet of the horde.
No way I missed it?
He had aimed properly.
You're good in a fight? But is this your first time with a bow?
The squad leader, who had been trying to keep things together despite his nerves, spoke up as he climbed up behind Enkrid. He had shown a good deal of courage even in today's tough situation. The wall shook again with another impact. Thud, roar! The noise made it hard to hear unless one spoke loudly. Enkrid cupped his hand to his ear, pretending not to hear.
What did you say? I think you heard me just fine.
The squad leader was a bold one. Enkrid knew that much.
I didn't hear you.
With that, the squad leader turned his gaze away from Enkrid and looked out over the wall. He took a deep breath, tensed his stomach, and shouted,
Do you want to die like this?
The squad leader's voice boomed, catching the attention of the militia.
Forget about Pam. Is this the time to be distracted by your fallen comrades? Can't you see what's urgent right now? Get it together. Pick up your bows.
Kreis had said it before. The discipline here was solid. Just then, Deutsche Pullman came up the ladder on the opposite side. What was his nickname when he led the mercenary band? The One-Eyed Glaive? No, it was the One-Eyed. Deutsche, wearing an eye patch, glared at Enkrid with his remaining left eye before shouting,
But I will keep moving forward. Fire, the wall won't fault. Shoot.
It wasn't clear how many militia members there were, but there seemed to be plenty of arrows. There were at least 20 archers.
Excuse me, can I have my bow back?
The soldier from whom Enkrid had taken the bow approached, hand extended. Enkrid handed it back willingly. Archery wasn't quite his thing. It was something else he would need to train in later. Soon, the 20 or so archers began to rain arrows down below. The gnolls' ear-piercing shrieks mixed with the sound of arrows being released. The arrows found their marks, hitting the heads, arms, and legs of the advancing beasts and monsters. Some were wearing poorly made leather armor, but many of the gnolls were unarmored. Where had they acquired such weapons? There seemed to be over 500 of them. Equipping 500 soldiers like that would strain the resources of any local lord. It was a tangled mess. A conspiracy by someone? Well, that was none of Enkrid's concern. The important thing was that the militia had regained their composure. Enkrid watched the monsters and beasts die under the hail of arrows, his gaze distant. He couldn't find his target earlier when they were on the run, but now there was time. With the wall protecting them and no need to dodge the hyena beast's teeth, finding the target was easy. Amidst the different types of gnolls stood a small gnoll. calmly perched on a small mound. Typically, a colony leader needed such a position to assert dominance and led from a noticeable elevated spot, while the others were shouting, running chaotically, and brandishing their weapons wildly. This gnoll stood alone, aloof. Enkrid had encountered this one several times before and nearly died each time. He had become good enough at distinguishing gnolls that recognizing this one wasn't difficult. A few more encounters, and he might even start differentiating between attractive and ugly gnolls or those with unique features.
I'll leave this to you,
Enkrid said as he descended the wall again. As he climbed down, he felt a sense of emptiness. Enkrid shouted loudly enough to be heard over the gnoll's cries.
No matter what happens, keep shooting. If you see an ally, don't hit them.
What kind of nonsense is that? Deutsche, who had been yelling at the militia to aim for the heads of the creatures at the gate, looked at Enkrid. What the hell was he shouting about as he went down? It was incomprehensible. There were rumors that he had cut down some of his subordinates, with the squad leader claiming they had behaved strangely. In the midst of it all, one of his subordinates was missing. He had been a sharp one. Of course, this wasn't the time to delve into that. Deutsche was quite a capable mercenary. As the situation worsened, he had prioritized clearly. First, deal with the monsters. After that, he planned to get to the bottom of what was going on with that crazy guy. Whatever Enkrid had been thinking when he cut down his own men, Deutsche intended to find out, even if it meant asking with a blade. Enkrid couldn't read Deutsche's mind, though he likely wouldn't have cared even if he could. He descended among those rolling logs and stones to block the gate.
Esther.
The panther, which had been guarding the gate until then, trotted over to Enkrid. Enkrid asked politely,
Can you watch my back?
One of the soldiers stacking obstacles at the gate glanced over. Why is he talking to a panther?
Krah.
The panther nodded as if it understood. What the hell is that? Even in this situation, it was a sight that caught the eye.
Hey, what are you doing?
A comrade called out to the soldier.
I'm coming.
The soldier returned to adding obstacles in front of the gate. If the gate broke, they would have to hold it. That would be when the melee began. He swallowed hard. Could he fight? He'd been trained, but this would be only his third real battle. He was nervous.
Ugh.
His knees felt weak. The thought of the horde of monsters beyond the wall was overwhelming. It was in this tense moment that Enkrid, now among them, spoke up.
From now on, everyone follows my orders.
He was the platoon leader who had come with orders, the man who talked to panthers.
Can we crack this gate open a little?
Then he spoke again, and to the soldiers it seemed like nonsense, not worth listening to.
Can't you open the door? Just a crack, enough for one person to slip through.
Enkrid asked, and the startled soldier responded with a question.
Right now?
Enkrid and the soldier's eyes met. Enkrid nodded.
Yes, now.
The soldier blinked. Where should he start explaining? Should he mention that if they open the door now, the group of monsters outside will come in, or that it's impossible to open the door? Should he ask if Enkrid couldn't see they were blocking the door for fear it might open? While the soldier was choosing his words, Enkrid suggested a compromise.
Didn't they make a small side door next to the main gate?
His tone was casual. Despite the fact that outside there were gnolls and hyenas bristling with arrows but still attacking, his tone sounded as if he was out on a picnic. Enkrid knew that getting anxious wouldn't change anything. In reality, nothing was changing. Hadn't he experienced this day over 200 times? He knew all too well that if left alone, they would keep coming. However, he couldn't just say,
I fought surrounded by those creatures, and even when a few of them die, they charge like berserkers.
Above all, he thought it was good that they had at least blocked the entry. It was a good start. Expecting the next steps to go well just because the start was good was foolish. But it was much better than starting poorly. Anyway, they couldn't open the door every time someone needed to pass. There had to be a small door for emergencies. Usually, when constructing something like this fortress, they made such provisions. Even though it was a pioneer village, there was a clear intention to build a castle later. The quarry, the workers, and the craftsmen they had gathered were a clear indication of that intention. Of course, Kreis had guessed this, and Enkrid had nodded in agreement when he heard it. While dedicating himself to training and practice, it was hard to notice these details. But Kryze's words and the repetition of these todays over 200 times had made it clear. Even someone with the brains of a ghoul should have noticed by now. Anyway, Enkrid needed to break the cycle of repetition. To do that, he had to go outside.
There is a small door.
The soldier was still flustered.
Then open it slightly, it's an order.
It was an unreasonable request and probably shouldn't have been followed. But the calmness of the request moved the soldier.
It's over there.
He hesitated, but Enkrid headed towards the small door. There was indeed a door. It seemed big enough for a couple of people to pass through if it opened wide. It was to the left of the main gate. From just beyond the wall came the guttural cries of the gnolls. The soldier, perhaps finally thinking clearly, spoke up.
If we open it now, we'll all die trying to hold them off.
It could be opened, but if they did, they would all die. So no, it was a polite refusal. Enkrid, without much thought, called out.
Esther.
Though they weren't exactly on the same wavelength just by looking at each other's eyes, they did understand each other to some extent at that moment. Esther nodded. The small panther had grown a bit since they last saw her, but she was still relatively small. However, her size couldn't be underestimated.
That one's a real creature.
Rem had said, because Esther wasn't an ordinary beast. She proved that again now. With a thud, Esther scaled the wall that the hyena monsters were trying to climb with their short legs. She climbed up, using her claws to grip the wall as if it were solid ground beneath her feet. Even considering the sharpness of her claws, her movements were unbelievably agile. To someone unfamiliar, it would have seemed like she was walking on the wall as if it were the ground. Even to Enkrid, who knew her, it looked that way.
She's climbing the wall?
The startled soldier muttered, his eyes seemingly twice as big as before. Normally, seeing her move through trees or rooftops, scaling a wall of this height, would be no big deal, but it was surprising for those who didn't know. Despite the wall being more than 3 times the height of a person, Esther easily climbed over it. But it didn't end there.
Oh, she...
The soldier watching couldn't continue speaking, his mouth agape. It was indeed surprising. Esther had leaped over the wall into the midst of the monsters and beasts. Esther's task was to disrupt them, to throw a wrench into the coordinated attacks of the gnolls and hyenas. Enkrid had this expectation, and Esther fulfilled it. A low, deep growl, different from the gnolls and hyenas, resonated from beyond the side door. It was a growl that shook the air and struck at the heart, a sound that could make anyone's knees weak.
Don't shoot the panther.
Came the shout from Deutsche Pullman. The gnolls' cries mixed with the whimpering of the hyenas and a few death cries of the gnolls. The sounds from the gnolls' mouths started to move away, indicating that the group blocking the door was dispersing. Enkrid's focused hearing caught this change.
Now.
At Enkrid's whisper, the soldier hesitated and asked, "Huh? This guy needs to be retrained from the beginning. How could he be so slow to react?"
Open the door.
Enkrid said, grabbing the soldier's wrist and pulling it. He applied force to the soldier's wrist and exerted a certain aura similar to a lethal intent, a technique he had learned by opening the gate of sixth sense. The malicious soldier began to hiccup, but that was the least of their concerns. Reluctantly, the soldier's hand reached the door latch.
If something goes wrong while opening it, you begin.
Then why was the commander committing what seemed like suicide? The soldier thought this, but still moved his hand. The lock on the side door was released.
Don't lock it, just hold it, and be ready to open it again when I ask.
What?
What on earth was he talking about? The side door opened slightly. Apparently, Esther had caused enough chaos among the monsters and beasts that they all turned around to look. Enkrid could see the backs of the gnolls' heads. It was fortunate that none of them were wearing helmets. Even just holding weapons made them a significant threat. In fact, he probably wouldn't have noticed helmets even if they had them. As he stepped through the side door, Enkrid let his arms hang loosely. As soon as he was completely outside, he relaxed his body and threw daggers in all directions, excluding his whistling daggers. Throwing daggers was entirely different from shooting arrows. He gauged their weight with his fingertips and swiftly swung his arms, embedding 4 daggers into the heads of the gnolls that had turned around. No gnoll could survive with a knife more than a hand's length embedded in its skull. That was a given. As 4 gnolls fell dead and 1 beast turned to look, Enkrid had already reached it. With a swift, downward slash from the middle, he executed a precise and economical sword strike. The strike split the back of one beast. With a swift motion, Enkrid's sword sliced through the spine, organs, and parts of the bones, cutting the creature in half. Simultaneously, he stepped to the left and struck another beast's head with his knee. Using the twisting motion of his waist, he crushed the skull, causing the eyes to bulge forward, with the optic nerves dangling. After killing 2 beasts, Enkrid began to cut down the remaining monsters without hesitation. Through training his sense of evasion, he had developed a heightened sense of coordination. The moment he saw, felt, and reacted, his body moved instinctively. Enkrid danced among the monsters, and in a short, deadly dance, 3 gnolls and 2 hyena beasts lay sprawled on the ground, heads, chests, heads again. One gnoll had a hole the size of a silver coin in its body. This was the result of a combination of short, precise strikes and stabs. Finally, the door through which Enkrid had come closed.
Were they just watching?
The door had closed slower than he expected. The sound of the door locking followed shortly after.
I said not to lock it.
Still, would they really have left it open? Getting back would come later. Now was the time to do what needed to be done. With Enkrid's swordsmanship and deadly skill, the gnolls and hyenas around them fell rapidly, and the remaining creatures, seeing this, charged at Enkrid and Esther. It was only natural that even when faced just 2 opponents, sticking together in combat would be advantageous. Esther moved toward Enkrid. Even while rushing over, Esther didn't just come directly. The panther's prowess was remarkable. With a powerful push off the ground, she raked her claws through the air, slicing any gnoll or beast that came into contact with them into pieces. It didn't matter if it was the head or the chest. It was a combination of overwhelming strength and cutting power. As Esther charged forward and the gnolls and hyenas closed in with weapons, teeth, and claws, Enkrid spoke.
Esther, can you cover the back?
What did he mean by that? Esther's eyes questioned him, but Enkrid did not answer.
Is this guy serious?
Esther felt a surge of anger. Just as Enkrid seemed to draw attention, he suddenly suppressed his presence, but that wasn't all. Rolling in the blood of the gnolls and hyenas he had slain, he pressed his belly to the ground, lying flat. Naturally, the enemy's attacks would focus on Esther. It all happened in an instant. Esther and Enkrid's sudden assault, the slaughter of a dozen beasts and monsters, Esther drawing their gaze, and then Enkrid's disappearance. All in a flash. The eyes of the gnolls, caught off guard, turned red, reminiscent of berserkers. With bloodshot eyes, the gnolls unleashed their rage, charging at Esther to kill her. Esther skillfully dodged and stepped back. She wanted to ask Enkrid what he was doing, but then she saw him crawling on the ground, stilling his breath even as some gnolls stepped on him. It was clear what he was trying to do.
Fool.
The idiot had asked her to cover his back. Esther exhaled sharply and moved her body, enhanced with magic. The incredible strength and some of the magic infused in her claws showed their mysterious cutting power. She split the heads of 2 charging hyenas into 3 pieces, buying time while making herself hard to catch. This was what the madman had meant by asking her to cover his back. He wanted her to handle this damned group of monsters. Esther's guess was correct. It matched Enkrid's intent. He hid his scent with the blood, flesh, and entrails of the enemies, crawling with a killing intent that mimicked Jackson's technique. Enkrid's target was clear, the gnoll who seemed to be their leader. Enkrid realized that his abilities had changed.
It's different.
Even though the changes were significant, Enkrid was not so dull as to fail to notice them. He felt and recognized these changes. Previously, he had to repeat and repeat again to barely learn something. This time, things were decidedly different. This was a day for honing the sense of evasion. There had been countless repetitive days, even some that seemed pointless. Yet, even on those days, he pushed himself hard, crawling and never stopping. Every single one of those days contributed to his forward progress. The changes manifested in his swordsmanship and other areas as well.
If you know how to emit killing intent, you should also know how to conceal it.
This was something Jackson's had said when Enkrid asked about a peculiar technique, the stab without killing intent.
You don't need to learn it, but if you understand the principle, it might be useful.
Jackson's words suggested a practical application, but his eyes seemed to scold Enkrid, as if questioning why he hadn't yet mastered the sense of evasion. They seemed to challenge him, asking how much longer he would remain slow. Not that Enkrid paid much mind to this. What couldn't be done was simply a matter of persistence. At that time, he had merely asked out of curiosity and received an answer. The stab without killing intent was a technique where the attack was executed purely through movement, devoid of any detectable intent or force. Even when seen, it left one doubting if it was indeed a real attack. That was the extent of the explanation. During the more than 200 days focused on mastering the sense of evasion, he also needed to learn to control his own killing intent. Through the process of constant evasion, he instinctively picked up something through his body. It was a matter of reacting purely based on senses, not on intent or force, seeking to refine his body's reaction speed rather than relying on aggression. In the midst of this, he realized something. Enkrid had learned to use that something. It was the method of concealing and suppressing his presence, a technique akin to that of an assassin's. Of course, it wasn't perfect. He merely imitated it by slightly hiding his presence and breathing slowly and deeply.
This isn't enough.
Enkrid crawled across the ground, stained with the blood of gnolls and hyenas, even hugging a gnoll's corpse as he moved. If anyone were watching him, they would be amazed. Despite having a beast slung over his back, he crawled with frightening speed. Crawling is one of my specialties, he thought. In terms of crawling, Enkrid was beyond top tier, so he kept crawling. He heard Esther let out a loud cry from behind. "I'm sorry, I'll give you 2 pieces of jerky when we get back," he thought to himself as he continued to crawl. By the time he reached a small rise, there were only a few gnolls and beasts left around him. He crawled up the rise. The stench of blood and the foul odor from rolling on the ground clung to him. The smell of monster blood was, as always, unbearably pungent. To Enkrid, it was a familiar experience. As a mercenary, this kind of thing was part of everyday life. He had learned back then that monster blood could hide a lot more than one might expect. After reaching the top of the rise, Enkrid felt a sense of satisfaction. His target was there, and he couldn't help but feel pleased.